Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, we begin with the latest on Donald Trump's transition. The president-elect has made another controversial choice to fill his cabinet, naming Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. Trump made it official at a Mar-a-Lago gala last night.
We want you to come up with things and ideas and what you've been talking about for a long time, and I think you're going to do some unbelievable thing. Nobody's going to be able to do it like you.
President-elect Trump's decision puts a prominent vaccine skeptic and critic of the pharmaceutical industry in charge of federal health policy. We get more from Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson in Washington.
He has tremendous power over all Americans' day-to-day lives. I mean, there was talk that he might get an advisory role, something like Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy got, some sort of off-the-book, project to work on. Instead, he put him right at the heart of Americans' health and diet.
Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson says Kennedy's views on vaccines and support for things like raw milk and removing fluoride from water could set him up for a tough Senate confirmation.
Well, Nathan, the president-elect also gave a sneak preview of a cabinet pick he plans to announce today. Trump says he'll name North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum to be Secretary of the Interior.
We're going to do things with energy and with land, interior, that is going to be incredible. And so I look forward to doing the formal announcement.
Donald Trump's decision would give Burgum significant influence over his plans to ramp up sales of oil and gas leases, including in the Gulf of Mexico, that have been curtailed under President Biden.
Along with all that, Karen, Trump has also chosen Jay Clayton to be the U.S. Attorney for Manhattan. We get more on that from Bloomberg's Doug Krisner.
The Manhattan U.S. Attorney's Office is famous for tackling complex financial cases. Appointees are historically veterans of the office. Clayton led the Securities and Exchange Commission in the first Trump administration, and in that role, he focused on protecting smaller investors from fraud and financial industry abuses, rather than waging ideological fights. Trump has also tapped two of his own criminal defense attorneys for powerful positions in the Justice Department. Todd Blanche has been selected as Deputy Attorney General and Emile Beauvais as Principal Associate Attorney General. In New York, I'm Doug Krisner, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Doug, thank you. Well, Donald Trump still has not announced his pick to be the next Treasury Secretary, but one name that's not on his list is Jamie Dimon. The president-elect ruled out the J.P. Morgan Chase CEO in a Truth Social post, saying he respects Dimon greatly, but he won't be invited into the Trump administration. Dimon, for his part, says he's okay with that, and J.P. Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon told that to Bloomberg's Lisa Abramowitz at the APEC CEO Summit in Peru. Trump's team is considering Key Square Group founder Scott Bessent, Cantor Fitzgerald CEO Howard Lutnick, and former U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer for the Treasury role. The decision could come as soon as this week.
Well, before Trump takes office, Karen, New York Governor Kathy Hochul is seeking to push through a new congestion pricing plan for drivers into large parts of Manhattan.
The MTA will implement a congestion pricing plan with a reduced daytime toll of $9 beginning in January. You heard that correctly. It was $15 before, and now it is $9. That is a 40% reduction.
New York Governor Kathy Hochul says the MTA will vote on the new tolling structure at its monthly board meeting on Monday. The plan faces opposition from President-elect Trump. He has vowed to terminate congestion pricing, as well as lawsuits from New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy and other groups.
Well, Nathan, let's turn to the markets, and we continue to see weakness in the equity markets following yesterday's drop on Wall Street. The declines come after Jay Powell indicated the Fed was in no rush to cut interest rates.
The economy is not sending any signals that we need to be in a hurry to lower rates. The strength we're currently seeing in the economy gives us the ability to approach our decisions carefully.
Powell's remarks prompted traders to pare back expectations for a December rate cut. It now stands at less than 60%. It was roughly 80% on Wednesday.
Well, despite yesterday's stock drop on Wall Street, Karen, Ed Yardeni, president of Yardeni Research, remains very bullish on the markets.
The reality is we haven't been bullish enough, and we've been among the most bullish. But so now we're looking for 6,100 by the end of the year on the S&P 500. That's almost a layup. And then I think we're looking for 7,000 by the end of next year, and 8,000 by the end of 2026, and 8 to 10,000 by the end of the decade, probably closer to 10 than to 8.
That was Ed Yardeni of Yardeni Research. The S&P 500 closed at 59.49 yesterday.
Well, Nathan, Bitcoin is higher this morning. Right now, the digital asset is up 1%. It's at $89,100. It has jumped about 30% since Trump's election victory 10 days ago.
Well, let's check some stocks on the move this morning, Karen. We're watching shares of Applied Materials. Right now, they are down about 6%. The largest maker of U.S. chip manufacturing equipment gave a disappointing revenue forecast. And we get more from Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
Applied Materials said fiscal first quarter sales will be around $7.15 billion. That compares with a $7.25 billion average of analyst estimates. Massive spending on artificial intelligence computing has fueled demand for the most advanced chips and, in turn, the machines needed to produce them. But other sectors of the industry are slowing down. Some makers of chips for industrial equipment and vehicles, for instance, have reported sluggish demand. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Charlie, thank you. Well, Domino's delivering for investors this morning. That's thanks to Warren Buffett, as Berkshire Hathaway bought 1.3 million shares of the pizza chain in the third quarter, and that brings the conglomerate stake to 3.6%. Domino's is up about 7.5% this morning. Buffett also bought Pool Corporation during the third quarter. That stock is up more than 6%.
On the economic front this morning, Karen, a busy week of data wraps up with retail sales for the month of October. Economists are looking for a gain of 0.3%. We get more from Bloomberg's Michael McKee.
The old saying may still be true, never stand between an American and a cash register. Analysts anticipate retail sales rose nicely in October as consumers continue to power the economy. It's a semi-cautious view. Sales won't be quite as strong as September's back-to-school spending, and gasoline prices fell during the month. Retail sales are denominated in dollars. But it should be strong enough to raise more doubts about the path of Fed rate cuts if the economy continues to grow faster than the central bank expects. Michael McKee, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Mike, thanks. Well, over in Europe, the UK economy cooled faster than expected in the third quarter, the first quarter under the new Labour government. GDP rose 0.1% last quarter compared to the previous quarter, falling short of economists' forecasts. Time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's John Tucker. John, good morning.
And good morning, Karen. Senate Democrats plan to use their last weeks in the majority to try to make public a House sexual misconduct probe into Matt Gaetz, President-elect Donald Trump's controversial pick for Attorney General. Let's get more this morning from Bloomberg's Scott Carr.
Chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee Dick Durbin issued a statement calling on the House Ethics Committee to preserve and share the report on Gaetz, who's been the subject of an ongoing House investigation into allegations of sexual misconduct, illicit drug use, and misuse of campaign funds. Republican representative from Kentucky Andy Barr tells Bloomberg he thinks the committee needs to release it.
Yeah, I think the Senate will demand that. I think the Senate will need that information in order to work its will in the advise and consent process.
So far, Director of the House Ethics Panel Tom Rust has declined to comment. In Washington, I'm Scott Carr, Bloomberg Radio.
Meantime, the incoming Senate Majority Leader John Thune is telling Fox all options are on the table to clear President-elect Trump's nominees, including allowing them to take their jobs without Senate confirmation. Iran has offered written assurances to the Biden administration it wasn't seeking to kill Donald Trump. The Wall Street Journal reports the Iranian message was delivered on October 14th and not previously reported. The Justice Department just last week outlined allegations that Iranian agents plotted to assassinate Trump before he was reelected. Elon Musk's social media platform X sued to block a California law aimed at curbing AI-generated deceptive election content on social media. They claim the measure is an unconstitutional affront to free speech. The law requires large online platforms to remove content deemed materially deceptive. X claims it will lead to widespread censorship of political speech. And New York and the Northeast, in the midst of the worst fire season in more than a decade, with little relief in sight for weeks as drought and high winds threaten to raise the threat again. Several blazes have broken out in New York in the past few days, a rare sight this late in the year. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Karen.
All right, John, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update, brought to you by Tri-State Audi. We say good morning to John Stashower. Hi, John.
Hi, Karen. The Philadelphia Eagles went to the Super Bowl 2 years ago. They began last season 10-1, but finished going 1-6, beating only the Giants. Slow start to 2024, 2-2 after September. The Eagles have not lost since, and a big reason why, their new running back, the former Giant.
So the call is on the ground, and a first down, and a ton more. Barkley, touchdown.
On Amazon Prime for Saquon Barkley, 146 yards rushing, 52 more receiving, 2 touchdowns in a 20-second span of the fourth quarter. The Eagles fell behind the Commanders and then scored 23 straight points. They made it 6 wins in a row, 26-18 over Washington. Philly at 8-2 takes control of the NFC East. Giants have Sunday off. Jets home to play the Colts. Their last home game was an impressive win over Houston, but then a dud last week at Arizona. And yet Jeff Ulbrich does not sound like the coach of a 3-7 team.
I'm just so fortunate that the group that we have, the DNA, the character of them is so unique and so different than most teams and locker rooms out there, in my opinion. The fact that, we've had struggles and we haven't lived up to expectations to this point of the season, but they have stayed together and they continue to work their butts off.
Quarterback Sunday, Aaron Rodgers, a month shy of his 41st birthday against 22-year-old Anthony Richardson. At the Garden, Rangers scored 3 times second period, all 3 in a span of 4 minutes, 40 seconds. They beat San Jose 3-2. Devils, a second straight win at Florida, 6-2, and the Islanders won 5-2 at Vancouver. Winnipeg finally lost at Tampa Bay. Jets are now 15-2. Knicks and Nets at MSG tonight. They'll also play there on Sunday. Tampa Bay Rays are homeless due to Tropicana Field being damaged by Hurricane Milton. They'll play their games next season in Tampa, but at 11,000 seats Steinbrenner Field, the Yankees spring training home, the Rays will pay the Yanks $15 million. That's well more than they pay any of their players. Lindsey Vonn hung up her skis 6 years ago. Now at age 40, the winner of 82 World Cup races, coming out of retirement. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. J.P. Morgan Chase Chief Executive Officer Jamie Dimon says companies will look to pursue acquisitions more in the wake of Donald Trump's election victory. Regulation had chilled deal activity. Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase spoke with Bloomberg's Lisa Abramowitz at the APEC CEO Summit, and Lisa started by asking about President-elect Donald Trump.
You had a big sea change that took place in that vote the other day, and some people prepared and some weren't prepared. But I think the most important thing is whoever had been elected, and this is my belief, they are entering and going to be responsible for the most complicated geopolitical, military, and geoeconomic situation that the world has faced since World War II. And of course, I wish them all the best. I think people try to help get through this. It could be a difficult thing with a lot of unknowns and uncertainties, and so policy is going to matter. And of course, who runs the government will be determinative there.
President-elect Donald Trump sends a message to you that he respects you greatly, but you will not be part of the Trump administration as a Treasury Secretary. If that were something that were interesting to you.
First of all, I wish the president well, and thank you. It's a very nice note. But I just want to tell the president also, I haven't had a boss for 25 years, and I'm not about ready to start.
I want to start by also talking about the response in markets in the U.S., which has very much been, this is going to be a pro-growth shock with companies that are going to be investing much more, deploying cash, aggressive in terms of U.S. expansion. Have you seen any signs that that's truly the case?
Well, yeah, you've already seen, the markets have responded quite well. And, I think America needs a growth strategy, so I literally applaud that. I think collaboration between government and business is the way to have growth. They've already spoken about a deregulatory environment. I want to point out, I'm not talking about just getting rid of regulations, but the regulatory environment in most countries has become stifling. And in a lot of countries, including Peru, it's why you're growing maybe at 2.5%, not 4 or 5. In America, it's why we've been growing at 2% for 20 years and maybe not 3. So I do think it's a reasonable thing to have that kind of reform. And that reform has to go deeper than just regulations, which can unleash capital and investment and banking and stuff like that. It's got to be permitting. and all the related things that come with that, where people, you were just mentioning a mine that, someone bought that could do rare earths in the United States. It's 10 years. They haven't gotten their permits yet. I mean, it's a shame, and we're doing this to ourselves, and it's a mistake. So I applaud any government that says, I'm going to make government more efficient. And I think inefficient government is one of the reasons that people are frustrated. That why you have some populism, because they may blame, they may look at big companies, but they also know their government isn't spending their money wisely.
And that was the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, Jamie Dimon, speaking with Bloomberg's Lisa Abramowitz at the APEC CEO Summit in Lima, Peru. Hear more of their conversation on the Bloomberg Talks podcast feed. You can find it on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you get your podcasts. And for more on the Trump transition and how it's being received around the world, we're joined by Bloomberg News senior writer Stephanie Baker. Stephanie, good morning. It's interesting to start off with that perspective from the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, putting something of an optimistic spin on what a Trump administration could mean for markets. How are world leaders, how are global CEOs receiving what they're seeing so far from the Trump transition?
Well, obviously, the markets have been on quite a ride since Trump's reelection, and there's a lot of optimism about growth in the United States. But I think outside the United States, a lot of world leaders and CEOs are really worried about these sweeping tariffs that Trump has vowed to put on goods, not only from China, but from Europe, and what that will do to European economies that are still somewhat fragile after the COVID pandemic. So I think there is a lot of nervousness and uncertainty. We don't know if the Trump tariffs will indeed be implemented and at what level. So it remains to be seen. And of course, whoever he picks as Treasury Secretary could have, wide influence on that.
Now, obviously, Jamie Dimon ruled out of the Treasury Secretary shortlist. Where do you see things leaning right now? We've seen some pretty public jockeying for this position from the likes of Howard Lutnick at Cantor Fitzgerald and, of course, Scott Bessent of Key Square Group.
Right. So Scott Bessent was seen as the leading candidate, but I've been reading some doubts about his candidacy. I think some people in the Trump camp questioning his background, having worked for Soros Fund Management. And of course, Trump and George Soros are not great friends, to put it mildly. So whether or not that would really impact his candidacy or not, and as you mentioned, that Howard Lutnick, was also considered a potential candidate. So this is part of the sort of reality TV show we're seeing with Trump rolling out these announcements in a way that's not very traditional. He's not really making the most of them, having these candidates come out and make speeches, et cetera, that's sort of being rolled out by press releases and in quick succession.
And gala announcements at Mar-a-Lago, as we heard last night with the president-elect announcing Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the vaccine skeptic, is his choice to be Health and Human Services Secretary. We've seen a number of eye-opening decisions, to say the least, and this seems to be another one of those, certainly, for a more traditional public health perspective.
Absolutely. I mean, he's obviously a vaccine skeptic. He's been very vocal about that. He's criticized fluoride in water supplies, traditionally a very local issue in the United States. But, some of his ideas on food policy and nutrition, I think, will, gain more support and more consensus. And, perhaps he can forge some new ideas to clean up public health measures in terms of things like he's complained about food dyes being allowed in U.S. food products. So it may not be all negative. Whether or not he'll get confirmed is a major question. He has to be confirmed by both the Senate Health Committee as well as the Senate Finance Committee, because Health and Human Services oversees Medicare and Medicaid. So, it remains to be seen whether or not this can get through.
If he does get through, though, Stephanie, I mean, President-elect Trump had talked about RFK Jr. going wild on government health agencies. I mean, how much power would he have to wield over public health?
Well, a lot. And I think this is going to come right up against, Congress. The House controls the purse strings. So there are limits as to how much he can just eliminate as the head of Health and Human Services. That it is congressionally mandated, but he could just fire a whole load of people and let programs wither on the vine, and that's one way of doing it. What's notable is he wasn't actually angling for this job. He had been talked about as a health czar, a position that wouldn't have required any confirmation process. So this is a twist, and whether or not perhaps he runs into trouble in the Senate and ends up being that health czar in the end, remains to be seen.
And when you speak of difficulties with Senate confirmations, there's still a lot of question around whether Matt Gaetz is going to make it through that process to lead the Justice Department. Where do you see things going when it comes to the House ethics investigation that was set to be released today before he resigned his seat as a congressman from Florida? Got about a minute left.
Right. They were due to vote on whether to release that report today. I woke up this morning thinking some enterprising journalist must have gotten their hands on this by now. That hasn't happened yet. There's a huge pressure for that report to be released, and that is going to have a huge influence on whether he gets through the Senate confirmation process. And I think the whole question of whether or not Trump can get these recess appointments through is a huge question. Both a majority of the Senate and the House have to vote to call a recess. So they'd basically be voting to remove their control over these confirmations.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, your morning podcast on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, and nationwide on Sirius XM Channel 121.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interfaces.
And don't forget to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. It's the latest news whenever you want it, in 5 minutes or less. Search Bloomberg News Now on your favorite podcast platform to stay informed all day long. I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.